John adjusted the scope of his weathered M200 intervention sniper rifle, its polished barrel glinting faintly in the dim light, filtering through the broken windows of an abandoned apartment. Outside, the alien patrols move with calculated precision, their armored figures glowing faintly under the eerie blue light of their energy weapons. You know, they used to say patience was a virtue, John muttered to himself, his voice gravelly and laced with dry humor. Didn't think I'd be practicing it at 65 while staring down the galaxy's ugliest cockroaches. A faint chuckle crackled through his earpiece. Still got jokes, old man, came the voice of Alan Jones, a younger resistance fighter stationed a few clicks away. I thought retirement meant bingo nights and bad TV reruns, not playing hide-and-seek with aliens. Retirement's boring, John replied, his tone light, but his eyes fixed on his target. And aliens don't cheat at hide-and-seek. Mostly, through his scope, he spotted his prey, an alien sniper perched atop a crumbling office building. The creature's exosuit shimmered, its advanced camouflage nearly blending into the surroundings. Nearly. John had spent decades learning how to see what others missed, and this alien was no exception. Breathing in slowly, he lined up the shot. The wind whispered through the broken city, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt metal and ash. He exhaled, his finger gently squeezing the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the sound of the shot swallowed almost instantly by the suppressor. The alien's head jerked back, its body slumping forward. From his vantage point, John watched as its comrades scrambled, scanning the area with their glowing visors and barking in their guttural language. "Target down," John murmured. "Damn, you're still sharp," Alan said, admiration tinged with concern. "But they're going to start looking for you, you know that, right?" "They can look all they want," John replied. "I've got more practice disappearing than they've got finding people." As if on cue, a low, droning sound grew louder. John peered out the window and spotted a swarm of alien drones converging on his position. He muttered a curse under his breath. "I might need to disappear sooner than I thought," he said, packing his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Need backups?" Alan's voice was serious now. "No," John said firmly. "Stay put. If they track me to your location, we'll both be screwed. Just keep your team ready. They'll need you more than me if this goes south." He moved quickly, descending the crumbling staircase of the building, his boots barely making a sound. The drones buzzed closer, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. John slipped into the shadows, blending into the ruins like a ghost. For a man of his age, he moved with remarkable agility, every step calculated and deliberate. Years of training had turned him into a predator, and now those instincts were all that stood between him and death. As he ducked into an alley, the sound of alien boots echoed nearby. Their voices carried a mocking tone, their laughter distorted through their helmet translators. "Humans," one of them sneered in their native tongue. "So fragile, so predictable." John couldn't help but smirk. "Predictable, huh?" he muttered under his breath. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, a noise emitter he'd cobbled together using salvaged alien tech. He activated it and tossed it further down the alley. The device emitted a sharp, piercing sound, drawing the aliens' attention. They moved toward it, weapons raised, while John slipped away in the opposite direction. "Still got it," he said quietly, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. As he navigated the labyrinth of ruins, his earpiece crackled again. This time, it was Elliot Greaves, the Resistance's tech specialist. "John, I hacked into their comms. They're calling in reinforcements. You've really pissed them off." "That's what I'm here for," John replied. "Funny, you know, if you ever decide to retire again, you could always do stand-up," Elliot quipped. "Yeah, sure. A funny thing happened on my way to the retirement home. I got invaded by aliens," John deadpanned. Despite the banter, John's focus never wavered. He knew the stakes. The Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity before, and John intended to ensure they regretted it. He reached a dilapidated safe house, its walls covered in old resistance graffiti. Inside, he found a stash of ammunition and supplies left behind by another cell. He quickly refilled his rifle and took a moment to catch his breath. Outside, the alien drones buzzed past, their searchlights scanning every nook and cranny. John knew it was only a matter of time before they caught his scent again. "Alan," he said into his earpiece, "how's the rest of the team holding up?" "Eager for some payback," Alan replied, "but worried about you. We can't afford to lose you, John." "You won't," John said firmly. "Not today." He glanced out the window, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The alien forces were regrouping, their movements betraying their frustration. "Let them mock us," John muttered. "Let them think we're weak. That's their mistake." As the sun began to set, casting the city in hues of orange and red, John shouldered his rifle once more. He knew this fight was far from over, but he welcomed the challenge. Because if there was one thing John Hunt had learned in his long life, it was that underestimating a human, especially one with nothing left to lose, was a fatal mistake. And tonight, the Galactic Empire was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The night settled over the ruined city like a suffocating blanket, broken only by the faint glow of alien patrols and the occasional flicker of resistance activity. John crouched on the rooftop of a crumbling factory, his breath visible in the cold air. Below, Darnak's soldiers moved with their usual mechanical efficiency, their exosuits humming softly as they scanned the area with advanced thermal scopes. "Four-man patrol at your 2 o'clock, Alan's voice whispered through John's earpiece. "Looks like they're sweeping the industrial zone. Want me to call in a distraction?" John adjusted his scope, observing the patrol through his rifle. "Nah," he said, his tone casual. "Let them sweep. I'll just mop. You're incorrigible, you know that," Alan said, though there was a faint chuckle in his voice. "Big word for a grunt," John quipped, his lips twitching into a smirk. As the patrol passed beneath him, John shifted his weight carefully, his movements silent and precise. He watched as the aliens communicated with clipped gestures, their helmet lights glowing faintly. Advanced as they were, they seemed to lack the instincts John had honed over decades of warfare. With a deep breath, he steadied his aim and fired. The first alien dropped without a sound, a neat hole in its helmet. Before the others could react, John fired again, and another fell. The remaining two panicked, shouting in their guttural language as they scrambled for cover. John moved swiftly, repositioning before they could pinpoint him. By the time they realized where he had been, he was already gone. "2 down, 2 to go," he muttered. "Show off," Alan teased. The aliens attempted to regroup, scanning the area with their energy weapons raised. John watched their frantic movements with a sense of grim satisfaction. They might have better tech, but they didn't understand the terrain. As one of the soldiers stepped closer to a pile of debris, John activated a small tripwire trap he had set earlier. The explosion was small but effective, sending the alien flying backward. 3 down, John said, his tone almost cheerful. The final soldier froze, clearly torn between retreating and continuing the search. John allowed himself a moment of pity before taking the shot. The alien crumpled, and the street fell silent once more. "You're like some kind of homicidal Santa Claus," Elliot's voice chimed in, breaking the quiet. "They never see you coming, but you leave presents everywhere." "Don't push your luck, kid," John replied, though there was a hint of amusement in his voice. He moved quickly, descending from the rooftop and disappearing into the shadows. The Darnak would be sending reinforcements soon, and staying in one place was a death sentence. As he navigated the maze of rubble and abandoned vehicles, his earpiece crackled with static. "John, we've got a problem," Alan said, his voice tense. "When don't we?" John asked, ducking into an alley and scanning the area. The Darnak just deployed one of their elite snipers. Named Soren. From what we've heard, this guy doesn't miss. John frowned, his grip tightening on his rifle. Great. Just what I needed. An alien with a god complex and a good aim. This isn't a joke, John, Alan said, his tone sharp. Soren's taken down entire resistance cells by himself. He's not like the grunts you've been picking off. Well, John said, guess it's time to see how he handles a little friendly competition. You're impossible, Alan muttered, but there was no denying the respect in his voice. As John continued through the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He paused, scanning his surroundings. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a familiar sensation, one he had learned never to ignore. Alan, he said quietly, I think your friend Soren's already here. Get out of there, Alan said immediately. Not an option, John replied, his voice calm. If he's here, he's hunting me. If I run, he'll just pick me off. Then what's the plan? John smirked, his fingers tightening around his rifle. Plan's the same as always. Outthink, outshoot, and make him regret stepping foot on my planet. The first shot came without warning, narrowly missing John's head and embedding itself in the wall behind him. He dove for cover, rolling behind a pile of rubble. Okay, he muttered, his heart pounding. He's good. John! Alan's voice was urgent. Still breathing, John said. For now. He peeked out from behind cover, scanning the area. A faint shimmer on a distant rooftop caught his eye. Soren's cloaked form. You could have just sent me a postcard, John muttered under his breath. He adjusted his scope, tracking the alien sniper's movements. Soren fired again, the shot grazing John's shoulder as he ducked. Pain flared, but John ignored it, his focus narrowing to a single point, the alien sniper. The two exchanged fire, each shot a test of skill and precision. John quickly realized that Soren wasn't just good, he was exceptional. The alien anticipated his movements, forcing him to constantly adapt. You're in over your head, old man, Elliot said, his voice tight with worry. Maybe, John replied, panting slightly as he repositioned. But I've been in over my head before. It's kind of my thing. He set a trap, rigging a small explosive to detonate when triggered by motion. Then he moved, deliberately exposing himself to draw Soren's fire. The alien took the bait, firing at John's decoy. The explosion rocked the rooftop, and for a moment, there was silence. Did you get him? Alan asked. Doubt it, John said grimly. Sure enough, Soren emerged from the smoke, seemingly unharmed. Well, that's just rude, John muttered. The alien raised his weapon, and John braced himself. But instead of firing, Soren spoke, his voice distorted but clear through a translator. You are skilled human, he said. But skill alone will not save you. John smirked, his grip steady on his rifle. Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you. Soren tilted his head, as if considering John's words. Then, without warning, he vanished, his cloaking device activating once more. John exhaled slowly, his muscles tense. The hunt was far from over, and he knew Soren would be back. But for now, he had survived. As he moved to a new position, his earpiece crackled. John, you okay? Alan asked. Still breathing, John said. But I've got a feeling this sniper duel's just getting started. Great, Elliot said sarcastically. Because what we really needed was more drama. John chuckled, despite the tension. Don't worry, kid. I'll make sure it's the aliens who get the unhappy ending. The night stretched on, and John prepared for the next round. He knew Soren was out there, watching, waiting. But so was he. And if the alien thought John Hunt was just another easy target, he was in for a rude awakening. The silence was deafening. John crouched in the shadows of a crumbling parking garage, his every breath measured and deliberate. The hunt with Soren had turned into a deadly chess match, one where each move felt more precarious than the last. He hadn't seen the alien sniper in over an hour, but he knew better than to think the danger had passed. Alan, any movement? John whispered into his earpiece, his voice barely audible. Negative, Alan replied. It's like he vanished. I don't like this, John. It's too quiet. Quiet means he's thinking, John said. And thinking means he's worried. That's good. Good for who? Elliot cut in. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're being hunted by a homicidal alien ninja with better tech and no sense of humor. John smirked, despite the tension. Don't worry, kid. I've got the sense of humor covered. Besides, he's not hunting me anymore. What do you mean? Alan asked, his tone sharp. John paused, his gaze sweeping the darkened ruins. I'm hunting him. He moved silently through the parking garage, his boots making no sound on the cracked concrete. He'd laid traps throughout the area, tripwires, noise emitters, even a few homemade EMP grenades. Every step he took was calculated, every decision deliberate. The air felt heavier, as though the city itself was holding its breath. John's instincts prickled, that familiar sense of danger creeping along his spine. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, his knuckles white. Then it came, the faintest sound of movement, a whisper of cloth against metal. John froze, his heart pounding. Soren was close. Alan, John said softly. He's here. Do you have eyes on him? Alan asked. Not yet, John replied, but I can feel him. For several tense moments, the only sound was a distant hum of alien drones and the soft rustling of debris in the wind. Then, a single shot rang out, the bullet striking the concrete pillar beside John. Contact! John barked, diving for cover. Soren's voice echoed through the parking garage, distorted and mocking. You are resourceful, human, but resourcefulness only delays the inevitable. John clenched his jaw, his mind racing. The alien was toying with him, trying to break his focus. Alan, track his position, John said, his voice low but steady. Working on it, Alan replied. Give me a second. John fired a quick shot in Soren's direction, forcing the alien to reposition. The sound of his movement gave John a brief window to act. He sprinted to a new vantage point, his eyes scanning for any sign of the sniper. Got him. Alan's voice broke through the static. Second level, southeast corner. John shifted his aim, spotting a faint shimmer where Soren's cloaking device failed to fully blend with the surroundings. He exhaled slowly and fired. The bullet grazed Soren's shoulder, and the alien let out a guttural snarl. John smirked. Guess you're not as untouchable as you thought. But the victory was short-lived. Soren retaliated with a barrage of precise shots, forcing John to retreat further into the garage. One of the shots struck his rifle, shattering the scope and rendering it useless. Damn it, John muttered, tossing the damaged weapon aside. He drew his sidearm, a standard-issue 9mm pistol, and checked the magazine. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. John, fall back, Alan urged. You're outgunned. No, John said firmly. If I fall back, he'll just pick us off one by one. This ends here. He moved carefully, relying on his instincts and the layout of the parking garage to stay one step ahead. Soren's shots grew more sporadic, a sign that the alien was growing impatient. Alan, patch me through to Elliot, John said. Elliot here, the tech specialist responded. Can you trigger the EMP traps I set on the southeast corner? John asked. On it, Elliot said. A moment later, a loud crackling sound filled the air as the EMP devices activated. Soren's cloaking field flickered and failed, revealing his tall, armored figure. Gotcha, John muttered, raising his pistol. He fired several shots, two of which struck Soren's chest. The alien staggered but didn't fall, his armor absorbing most of the impact. You are persistent, Soren said, his voice laced with grudging respect. It's a human thing, John replied, his tone dry. Soren raised his weapon, but John was faster. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the shot, and closed the distance between them. The fight devolved into close quarters, a brutal clash of skill and determination. Soren's strength was overwhelming, but John's agility and experience kept him in the fight. At one point, Soren managed to pin John against a pillar, his blade inches from John's throat. "Your resistance is admirable," the alien said. "But futile." John grinned, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "Futile's my middle name." With a sudden burst of strength, he kicked Soren's knee, forcing the alien to stumble. John seized the moment, grabbing one of his EMP grenades and shoving it against Soren's chest. "Say goodnight," John said, activating the grenade. The blast sent both of them flying, the force knocking John into a pile of debris. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to his feet, his vision swimming. Soren lay on the ground, his armor sparking and his movements sluggish. John limped toward him, his pistol raised. "You fought well," Soren said, his voice faint. "Yeah," John replied, his tone grim. "And you underestimated me." He pulled the trigger, ending the alien's life. "John, are you okay?" Alan's voice crackled in his ear. John sank to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. "I'm alive," he said. "Barely." "Holy hell," Elliot said. "You actually did it." "Of course I did," John said with a weak chuckle. "I'm John Hunt. Didn't you hear? I'm unkillable." Despite the humor, he knew the battle wasn't over. The Galactic Empire wouldn't take Soren's death lightly, and the Resistance would face even greater challenges ahead. But for now, they had won a small but significant victory, and John Hunt was still standing. The morning sky was a sickly gray, painted with streaks of smoke and the faint shimmer of alien drones patrolling high above the city. John sat on the edge of a ruined overpass, cradling his battered sidearm in his lap. His body ached from the confrontation with Soren, and his left arm hung stiffly at his side, the muscles bruised and protesting every movement. The fight had been won, but the war raged on. Alan's voice buzzed through the earpiece, pulling John out of his thoughts. "John, you need to move. The Darnak are mobilizing. Soren's death has them on edge." John let out a dry chuckle, wincing as the motion tugged at his ribs. "You think they'll send someone worse next time? Maybe their Emperor himself." "Not funny," Alan replied, though his tone was tinged with genuine worry. "We've intercepted their comms. They've sent in air support. They're not just hunting you anymore. They're leveling the area." John wiped a hand across his face, the grime and dry blood smearing against his weathered skin. "Figures. Kill one sniper, and they throw a tantrum." "Where's Elliot?" he asked, scanning the horizon. "Setting up the signal jammer in Quadrant 5, Alan answered. "We need to block their reinforcements long enough to get you out of there." John nodded, though he knew Alan couldn't see it. "Good kid. Tell him to hurry up. I'm not exactly in the mood to get vaporized today." The distant roar of engines grew louder, and John squinted toward the horizon. 3 Darnak gunships emerged from the haze, their sleek frames glinting menacingly. They hovered like vultures, their weapons already locking onto the ruins below. "Alan, how much time do we have?" John asked, rising to his feet with a grimace. "Not enough," Alan replied. "Those gunships are armed to the teeth. You can't fight them." "Watch me," John muttered, slinging his pack over his shoulder. His mind worked quickly, mapping out the terrain and the traps he had set during his scouting runs. He couldn't take on the gunships directly, but he didn't need to. He just had to be smarter than their pilots. He moved through the rubble, his steps deliberate despite the pain that gnawed at his body. The gunships closed in, their cannons firing sporadically, churning up dust and debris. John ducked behind a collapsed wall as an explosion rocked the ground, sending shards of concrete in every direction. "Alan, patch me into Elliot," John said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Elliot here," came the young man's voice, laced with tension. "I'm almost done, but these drones are everywhere. I can't get a clear signal." "Hold tight, kid," John said. "I'll draw their attention. You focus on the jammer." "John, are you insane?" Elliot snapped. "You can't." "Elliot, John interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You finished the job. That's all that matters." He cut the connection before Elliot could argue and sprinted toward the nearest gunship, weaving through the debris. He fired his pistol, the bullets pinging harmlessly off the ship's armor, but it had the desired effect. The gunship turned, its cannon swiveling to track him. "Come on," John muttered, his heart pounding. "Follow the old man." The gunship opened fire, and John darted into an alley, the walls around him disintegrating under the onslaught. He led the ship through a winding maze of ruins, luring it toward one of his traps. As he rounded a corner, he triggered a tripwire, and an explosion erupted behind him, engulfing the gunship in flames. "One down, 2 to go." "John!" Alan's voice crackled in his ear. "Elliot says the jammer's almost ready, but the second gunship's headed his way." John swore under his breath. "Tell him to stay low." "I'm on it." He doubled back, his legs screaming in protest as he pushed himself to keep moving. The second gunship loomed ahead, its cannons trained on the building where Elliot was stationed. John grabbed a smoke grenade from his pack, pulled the pin, and lobbed it into the open street. Thick, choking smoke billowed out, obscuring the gunship's vision. Using the cover, John climbed a nearby structure, his movements slower and more labored than they had been in years past. When he reached the top, he crouched low and aimed his pistol at the gunship's exposed thrusters. He fired several shots, the bullets sparking off the machinery. It wasn't enough to disable the ship, but it got the pilot's attention. The gunship turned toward him, its cannons roaring. John barely managed to leap to another rooftop as the building he had been on collapsed in a deafening roar. He scrambled to his feet, coughing from the dust and smoke, and kept moving. "Elliot," John barked into the comms. "How much longer?" 30 seconds, Elliot replied, his voice frantic. "But they're closing in." John gritted his teeth. "Then I'll buy you 30 seconds. He grabbed his last EMP grenade and hurled it at the gunship. The device detonated in midair, sending a wave of energy that temporarily disabled the ship's targeting systems. It spun wildly, crashing into a nearby building in a shower of sparks and metal. The final gunship roared overhead, its spotlight sweeping across the ruins. John ducked into a trench, his body screaming for rest. He could hear the faint hum of Elliot's jammer activating, the signal jamming the Darnak comms and reinforcements. "Alan," John said, his voice hoarse. "Tell me the jammer's working." "It's online," Alan confirmed. "Reinforcements aren't coming, but that last gunship isn't leaving without a fight." John forced himself to his feet, his vision blurring. "Then we finish this." He moved toward the final gunship, his pistol feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. The ship hovered low, scanning for targets. John waited, his breath shallow, until the moment was right. Then he sprinted forward, firing at the ship's exposed underbelly. The gunship turned, its cannons roaring. John dug behind a pile of rubble, the explosion shaking the ground beneath him. He spotted a fuel tank lying amidst the wreckage, likely left behind by the Darnak troops he'd ambushed earlier. "Alan," John said, his voice tight. "Tell Elliot to get clear." "What are you doing, John?" Alan asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Ending this," John replied. He grabbed the fuel tank, his body protesting every movement, and rolled it into the open. The gunship's cannons locked onto it, and John fired his pistol, igniting the tank just as the ship unleashed its barrage. The resulting explosion was deafening, a blinding flash of light and heat that consumed the gunship and sent John flying backward. He hit the ground hard, the world spinning around him. "John!" Alan's voice was frantic in his ear. John groaned, forcing his eyes open. The sky above was filled with smoke, but the gunships were gone. He let out a weak laugh, his chest heaving. "Still alive," he muttered. Elliot appeared moments later, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "You're insane," he said, pulling John to his feet. "Yeah," John replied, leaning heavily on the younger man. "But it worked, didn't it?" As the two of them hobbled back toward the resistance base, John allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The Darnak might have more firepower, but humanity had something they couldn't match: the will to fight, no matter the odds. And as long as John Hunt was breathing, the fight wasn't over.